Well, good afternoon, those of you points west, and good morning, those of you points east. I'd very much like to welcome you to this seminar on Brexit. We are not going to be discussing COVID at the moment, though COVID obviously colours everyone's lives. The first section is going to be a discussion with the National Tourist Offices, and I'm delighted to hand over to Tim Fairhurst, the Secretary General of ETOA's Brussels manifestation, to take control of this meeting. Thank you. Over to you, Tim.
Tom, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. We'll just give a little bit from a couple more people to come, but there's about 200 people tuning in. This first section, we have Corinne from Paris. Video is not available this afternoon, but Corinne Menagot from the OTCP, the Paris City Tourist and Convention Bureau, is with us today. Beatrix from the German NTO. Luis Araujo, who is very fashionably wearing two hats this afternoon. He's the new president of the European Travel Commission, and he also heads up Turismo de Portugal. And Niall Gibbons, many of you will know, heads Tourism Ireland. So we are going to start with a discussion that is very much focused on the UK as a source market. The next part of the session, from about 2:30 London time onwards, will focus more on some of the technical issues, legal, tax, operational. What we wanted to do in this session is focus primarily on how the UK's destination market see things and what their plans are. So just to get the conversation started, Luis, may I invite you just to give some preliminary remarks? Over to you.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Tim, and thank you to ETOA for not only for the invitation to be here, but for being such a loud voice in what we need during this turbulent times of COVID and turbulent times of Brexit too, because I think we have two turbulent times. In fact, as you said, I'm going to speak, well, mostly about Portugal and through Portugal, but give also an overview on the concerns which I think are common to any country inside the European Union. The UK market is hugely important to Portugal. 20% of share market, 20% of our tourists and revenues come from the UK market, mainly the Algarve, Lisbon, Madeira, but with the huge growth over the past 3 years into other regions of the country, especially the north and the Alentejo. So you can see how important the Brexit is, or the consequences of Brexit are to our country and also to the European Union. Just to give you an idea, 2/3 of travels from the UK roughly are to the entire countries of the European Union. So the consequences of how this is done, and speaking very clearly from one side and the other, because I think we're talking about, of course, the UK, but also the European countries, has huge impact in our business in Portugal and in any country inside the European Union. And the impact, I think, can be seen in two ways. One, which is the impact, of course, in the economy, in the UK economy and the other European countries' economy, in terms of employment, spending power, the evaluation or devaluation of pound facing euro. So I would say this is a very big concern on our side. The second concern, which is a concern that I think we have a little bit more work to do, or at least more responsibility, the ones who are here talking and the ones who are attending, is the impact of Brexit in the seamless traveling, especially at this moment. The 1st of January, we have to understand how this traveling will be made to any country. And of course, now I'm talking about Portugal and inside the European Union. The lack of information that we have so far is agonizing. I would say it's agonizing. The issues related with visas, with special needs of people, the health system, insurances, traveling with pets, working permits, driving licenses, taxes. All these issues have to be very clearly set up until the 1st of January. And we're lacking time, as you can imagine. The issues related with airline companies, taxes to airline companies. I'm sure each country is working. Portugal is working from its end to address all these issues, but there are issues that we need a bigger coordination inside the European Union. Just to finish, I would say the importance, the last data of importance about the relation of UK and Portugal. We have 300,000 Portuguese working in the UK and roughly 35,000 British people living and working in Portugal. So I would say at least this issue is crucial for the future understanding of both countries and inside the European Union too.
Thank you, Luis. Two very clear signals there. It's a very big market and there's a lot of uncertainty. Thank you for that initial observation. Beatrix, what's the view from Germany, please?
So thank you to Tom and thank you to Tim for inviting me. Hello, guten Tag, good afternoon, and yes, for Germany also, the UK is really an important volume market. We have approximately 5.6 million overnight stays in 2019, and for this year it's less, 60% less. We have only 1.7 million overnight stays from January to August. But we are thinking, we do believe that even after Brexit, the UK market will continue to be for us a real great and important market. We hope, we believe on Monday that there will be a small Brexit deal. And then I think in 2022, we have the same volume as we had in 2019. It's sure, and Luis already talked about it, in the first year after Brexit, we expect consumer insecurities around formal entry requirements. We are already speaking now what's going on, what will be for the health insurance, what will be with visas, the passport requirements. All this may cause, I'm nearly sure, a slight slowdown of numbers in the beginning, because we have a lot of questions on social media. What's going on? Can I go to Germany? What do I need for going to Germany? So the government has to be clear about this in the next weeks, in the next days. And potentially there could also be less flights, I'm sure, especially from low-cost airlines for every country. It will be the same for Portugal, for Spain, for everyone, because it will be, it's an impact on our business. It's not only Brexit, I think it's a lot of Corona also. The biggest challenge, and I agree with Luis, to achieving our goals to have a normal return on 22 is a weak pound, a weak British economy, and a high unemployment rate. This is, however, I think, plenty of data supporting a positive outlook. I believe on this market. UK travelers have the travel in the DNA, I'm sure. They want to travel. For the moment, when the British traveler want to go out of EU countries like Turkey, North Africa, and so they go on. It's not a real border for them. Also, the top 3 destinations are Spain, France, and Italy. It's all EU countries. So, and when they are going to the USA, it ranks in 4th place in terms of source markets. They have to formalities like ESTA. So they have to make the ESTA, but they're happy to do so. We would expect that the new entry requirements into the EU from the UK would be less strict than go to the USA. And I'm sure the British travelers will not see them as a hindrance. they will continue to travel. Another argument for traveling in our country, now I have to speak about Germany. I think everybody talks about sustainability, and Germany has really a lot to offer about sustainable travel. And we have a big choice for sustainable travelers. They are very welcome. We are actively promoting quality tourism and longer stays. And there's a lot to offer for the sustainable traveler. I would like to mention, I can compare all the times that Germany has also offers exceptional value for money. We believe also on the cultural market, the cultural travel. We are very strong. We are not very strong on Sun and Beach, but with the cultural travel, we are really a very big market. And for the moment, British market is on the second place for cultural trips, and it will also be an argument after Brexit. So also the recently emerging travel trends support a positive outlook. I'm sure, like for the moment, we want to de-stress, healthy living, ecologically friendly holidays, off the beaten track experiences, multi-generational holidays, healthy food, trendy food. For all these, Germany is and EU is a real big trend. So allow me a little bit to speak about our themes. We have for 21 German local culture and German spa tradition. I think both themes align very well with post-Corona, but also with post-Brexit. And only a last word to the travel industry. It's not easy for the moment, but we make together, we make campaigns with you, we make our German Travel Mart, road shows. So speak to our Charles Wilson, our sales manager. He can help you to make promotion for Germany, for the destination. And for always it B2C marketing, we make really big campaigns now with online campaigns via OTA, via publishers and social media. Very strong campaign with Facebook, YouTube and Twitter. But we are all together in these hard times, so we will go on, and thank you from Germany.
Beatrix, thank you very much indeed. And I know you will have to leave at past, but your colleague Charles will participate in the rest of the webinar. So if people want to use the chat to request contact with him, he's in the London office of the German National Tourism Organization. Beatrix, thank you. And you made the point about airlift and clearly aviation capacity. This is not a function of Brexit, but the UK was one of the pioneers of low cost after the Open Skies Agreement in Europe. And Ireland is also a centre of low cost as well. So the impact of reduced aviation capacity is an interesting question. But one city that does not necessarily depend on aviation in order to get a lot of business from the UK is, of course, Paris. So just to switch it from a country to a city perspective, I'd like to invite Corinne Menagot from Paris OTCP to share her observations, please. Corinne, the floor is yours.
Hi. Sorry for the camera. I don't know why it's working. It's not working. So happy to be here with you all. Yeah, of course, we are lucky because we have some train railway. So that's much easier than plane to come to Paris. So hopefully that won't change so much finally. I don't know. But of course, UK travelers are very important for Paris. It's one of the first population of foreign travelers coming to Paris, with 10% approximately of our foreign arrivals, so which is a lot. And moreover, I would say, which is very important for us in terms of leisure at least, and even for business, is that they spend a lot. So UK foreign travelers are really the ones spending the most, in fact, in Paris. They approximately expense per day and per person is about 147 euros. And usually the average is more at less than 140. So we're happy to have them, we'd say. So that's very important for us, of course. So of course, we're very worried about that. There are a lot of challenges. I think we have also some upsides possible. So I don't know what will happen exactly. I'm not sure it will be such a big change on leisure travel. Because as you were saying before, I think people will want to travel anyway. So even if you need your passport, or this is a little more complicated, that's not so much more complicated. The main issue will probably be for the people working and business travel, which is much more complicated to deal with in this no-deal Brexit thing, which was very easy to deal with till now, and that won't be so easy for the next months and next years. So this is probably the big question mark that we have in terms of business travel and exchange that we can have on that. And I would say on a more optimistic way, probably we also may have some upsides. So we are very, we pay very much attention to what will happen when it will be for the tax value, because it was we have some exchange with the UK and London and Paris for shopping essentially also, and shopping could be also an upside for that with a tax refund, because they will be entitled to have the tax refund finally. So that will be probably something we can also work on, and would be an asset for Paris maybe for this shopping population. So we will try to get the benefit of it, of course. Given that, I think the relationship that we have with London are very very close. We work a lot with them. So Paris and London have always been working together. We've been running some campaigns together, and so hopefully it won't be as easy as it was before, but hopefully we can just continue and pursue our efforts in this way, because I think we've got quite the same challenges as the city, especially now, and we have to work together also in the future.
Corinne, thank you very much indeed. And the sort of clear observation, certainly from long-haul markets, which have been largely absent in Europe, is that London and Paris is a classic combination for people who are seeking to visit more than one country. The UK and Ireland outside Schengen, there's already an immigration border there, which may get a little bit more complicated. But it's great to hear that at a city level, there's a real appetite for collaboration there. And I'm sure that's going to be an engine for creativity on the product side. So now I've mentioned Ireland, the UK's joyful partner since the 1920s in the common travel area, Niall, and your rather irksome neighbour to the east in terms of making life a little more complicated than it might otherwise be. But how do you see things, and is there anything positive to report about some of the dialogue you've been having?
Sure. Well, good afternoon from Dublin. Tim, Tom, congratulations on all the great work you've been doing in ETOA, a great partner of ours. And to Louis, Beatrix, and Corinne, good afternoon as well. I hope you're all keeping safe and well in your families. Yeah, I mean, look, Ireland and the UK have got many, many centuries of history between them. We are bound by history, by geography, by trade, and by tourism. And you know, when you look at the statistics, the UK is our biggest trading partner. The UK exports more to Ireland than it does to Brazil, Russia, India, China combined. We are their #1 tourism market. They are our #1 tourism market. The island of Ireland, north and south, which is part of the UK, and the island of Ireland, is marketed by Tourism Ireland as one. So that presents interesting complexities in the context of Brexit. But what I would say is that we welcome about, in a normal year, pre-COVID, about 4.5 million people from the UK. It's about 40% of our volume and about 30% of our spend. We are assured by the fact that regardless of the outcome of the talks on Brexit, the common travel area that exists between the UK and Ireland has been underpinned by legislation and will continue as it has done since 1923, which means that you can travel around the UK and Ireland as if it's one country for travel purposes. And that's been a key message for us during the last 18 months or so. We've been conducting a lot of research in the Great Britain market to see, how will Brexit impact on UK consumers. And up until last February, it was the #1 risk on our list, because I suppose the economic situation was the most worrying. But obviously COVID has completely overswamped everything that was on the list with regard to Brexit before. And all the things that Louise and Beatrix mentioned in relation to insurance and health insurance, driving, all those things are issues for us as well. And it really is important that we try and take the hassle out of travel. The last thing you want is your most important customer, unsure or uncertain. And I think there are a lot of important questions that need to be answered that have been overshadowed by COVID. I think for Ireland, I think we're going to be well positioned post-COVID, because what our current COVID research is telling us in all our key markets is that what people are going to be doing post-pandemic is looking to visit more familiar destinations, places that are closer to home, and looking to connect with family and friends. And Ireland ranks #1 in our research in Great Britain in terms of destinations that British people will travel to, because I think it's a place that they feel comfortable, secure, same language, drive on the same side of the road, and all those things that we sometimes take for granted. So I think we will see a very strong rebound from the Great Britain market into Ireland. However, I think it's going to be at least 3 years before we see things coming back to where they were pre-COVID, because I think once you get that initial rush of energy and pent-up savings that people have, and the release of energy and cash, I mean, all this government debt has to be repaid somehow. And I just wonder what the economic situation is going to look like post-COVID in 2 or 3 years' time. And that'll be the biggest driver of the tourism world. So there are a lot of complications with regard to Brexit that have been overshadowed by COVID. But if a deal isn't reached in the coming 6 weeks, we could be in for a messy 2021 from a consumer perspective. And I just hope that even if we get some skinny deal, as we're calling it, over the line, I think that would help confidence quite a lot. I mean, our market is 94% book online, 7% by the travel trade. But the trade is very important for seasonal and regional distribution. For example, 40% of all our British visitors come in Q1 and Q4. They're very important for city breaks. And as we know, all our cities have been decimated now as people reach for more open spaces. So, I mean, it's been a very difficult year for all of us in the travel and tourism industry. There's no words to describe the decimation and devastation. But I think the last thing we need on top of all this is a messy Brexit for our traveling consumers as we head into a post-COVID world 2021.
That's clear, Niall. I don't think anyone wants to see the mess. And I think if I could summarize what we've heard from all the speakers so far, it's the lack of clarity, it's the uncertainty, in addition to speculation about the possible strength of the UK economy and unemployment rates, which are causing serious concern. And notwithstanding Niall's comment about it's a relatively small percentage from the travel trade that goes to Ireland, the travel trade is very influential on bringing to policymakers' attention some of these frictional issues. So whether it's consumer perception of problems and what sorts of engines of reassurance we can make between us. So it's actually not going to be harder to travel. ETIAS will be very easy once ETIAS comes along in a year or two, and that's for visiting Schengen. So it's really focusing on the problems we can address. And from an opportunity perspective, I wonder if I could ask all of you, and Beatrix mentioned the cultural tourist and so forth. The stereotype has sometimes been that the UK is a source of cheap and cheerful tourism in various parts of Europe. Do you see over time, over 3 to 5 years, is there ambition from a destination perspective to cultivate that higher spending British tourist, staying longer, more cultural tourism? Any reflections on whether the demographic, the type of tourism from the UK will evolve over the next few years? Maybe Lewis, you could start.
Unmute. I think it has changed over the past years, for sure. As I told you, the biggest growth in Portugal were areas which are not traditional areas for the traditional UK visitor, like the North, the Alentejo. I think that has to do a lot with the effort we're doing in promoting different products, well, a different country, not only based on its core areas of tourism, for sure, like the Algarve or Madeira or Lisbon, but other areas attached to different interests, like the Alentejo attached to the wine tourism, or the cycling and walking paths of Portugal, or the history and culture, trying to promote Portugal as a country to visit the entire year and through the entire country. I think we're seeing that. What we expect for the future has a lot to do, of course, with Brexit, but with COVID too, and we can't split both. Unfortunately, we have to live with both of them for the next years, not only for this year, but for next years. And surely we're seeing, I won't say UK is a domestic traveler, but well, at least we're in the same time zone, which is good. It's an advantage for us. But we will see a lot of this loyalty or fidelity that exists between countries. And as I told, 20% of our tourists come from the UK. It's the longest prevailing alliance in the world of between two countries. And it's much more than just wine. There is a strong relationship between the two countries. And I have to thank all the British tour operators that have helped us in building this loyalty between the two countries and two nations. So I would say promoting alternative products like the summer festivals or other events that we're organizing, and hopefully we will organize in 2021, new destinations, what we call the networks inside Portugal, like the historic villages or the marble villages that we have in Portugal. There's an amount of product that can be commercialized, and it is completely new to the UK citizen. Of course, attracting digital nomads, I think everyone is going to do that, but I would focus a lot, and I think in terms of Portugal, we will be focusing a lot in the relation that exists and the not trying to attract all tourists, but trying to address the message to those who already know us, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Convincing them that there is much more to see in Portugal, and trying to showcase a country that is very much based in its purpose and knows what to do to attract people.
That's a great positive message, Luis. Thank you. I'm afraid we do only have about 2 minutes or so. So if I could invite Corinne and then Beatrix just to, quick 30-second, 1-minute reflection on where you see the product going over the next few years.
Yeah, I think anyway, we've got a huge history with British people, and they've been evolving like everyone. I think that's a great trend everywhere. So the tourism is more high-end than it was before and continues to be there. So British people are the ones going the most, for example, in the 4- and 5-star hotel. And I think it goes with, this looking for a more experiential tourism with a more added value for that. And Paris has so many things to offer on that, so that's easy for us. But 2/3 of the people coming from UK are repeaters. So they're not coming just for one thing, they're just coming for multiple things, and they're coming for more and more experiences. And I think this will be the key word for the next few years.
Experiential, great. Thank you, Corinne. Beatrix.
Hola, I will be very short. Germany for the moment is a very sure destination we have in this after COVID. I think it's a reason they can go there, they have a good health system. This is one thing, and Prince Charles was in Germany recently, and he spoke about this big history and relationship between Germany and the UK, and I think it will help us also. And I was a long time in other countries, and I can tell you, the British people love Germany. It's not only the way to drink wine, the way to drink beer, but it's really the culture, but also to go in the future in sustainable products. I think it's a new way after Brexit, after COVID-19.
Thank you very much, Beatrix. And what I'm going to do now is invite Niall to be the bridge from this section to the next as Tom takes over. So Niall, if you'd like to just share any reflections as to where you see product going, I'm going to say thank you to Corinne, Beatrix and Luis, some of whom can stick around for the rest of the afternoon. I have to go. Thank you very much for a very stimulating and forward-looking presentation from all of you. Niall, over to you, and then Tom. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim, and to all the colleagues across Europe for the interesting conversations and comments. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see where product evolves over the next number of years. I think there's going to be a big whoosh of travel in 2021 as people get out to enjoy themselves post-pandemic, and Ireland is well positioned in that space. But I certainly think that people have had a good experience of Irish outdoor life. It's becoming much more popular, really good investment in product development, really good investment coming down the track in culture, and ultimately heading towards longer staying, higher spending visitors. I mean, Britain will always be a volume market for us, And I think the sustainability debate will come back into the fore as well, in terms of, the question will probably be in a few years' time, is 2019 the high water mark again? It's a bit early to have that conversation yet because we're all on the floor. But I think if we're to experience some of those things that we did do in the large queues, the experience will be diminished. So it's going to be about giving a great experience, people ultimately enjoying themselves and being able to go back and tell their friends and family what a great time they had.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting point you made, because what we are frightened of is that 2020 will lead to a real loss of momentum. You almost need a conveyor belt of people going back to the origin market, saying what a great time they had, and then sort of motivating their friends and connections to do likewise. And we're very worried that 2020, if we're not careful, will be a hard break in that, and it's going to take some time to get momentum going. But it's possible. Anything is possible nowadays. As long as the connectivity is there and the ability is there, I'm sure we will have a bounce back. And I think you may be one of the first people to enjoy the bounce back, certainly as far as the UK market is concerned. And now, thank you so much for that insight. I'm now going to call on the other panelists, but do stay around if you want to in the background. You may wish to comment on what we've got to discuss, because I am going to invite Krista Barber, David Bennett, Martin Randall, Louisa Cole to join us, and Simon as well. Simon Smith, my colleague at ETOA, is going to be monitoring the questions coming in. Can I really just move straight through, because I know we've got a hell of a lot to cover today, to go straight through to Louisa, who's going to be talking about immigration and the impacts of employment law on the impact of Brexit on employment law. And I know this has a huge bearing on the operations of many, many operators watching. So if you will excuse me 1 minute while I get the your PowerPoint up and ready. I will try and do that now. I hope that's working. Can everyone see the PowerPoint? Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Louisa, over to you. Oh, you're on mute. You need to demute yourself.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks very much, Tom. It's a pleasure to be speaking to everyone today. I'm going to be talking about some of the upcoming changes to the UK immigration system and the impact of the end of free movement, as Tom said, as a result of Brexit. So moving on to the first sort of slide, talking about the headline changes that are coming up. As most of you will be aware, the UK's current immigration system is having an overhaul from the 1st of January 2021, and anyone employers want to recruit from outside the UK, excluding Irish citizens from that point, are going to need to apply for permission or potentially a visa before entering the UK. The requirements are obviously going to be different for each type of visa, and the new system will not apply to EEA or Swiss citizens who you already employ in the UK if they've obtained a status under the EU assessment scheme. And the reality of that really is that lots of employers are going to require a UK sponsor license, and that is the sort of blanket government authorisation for employers to employ at the moment non-EEA nationals in the UK, but will soon apply at the end of free movement also to EEA nationals. And that's also going to mean that most employees or potential employees in the future are going to need to qualify for a visa under the points-based system. So I'm going to talk a bit more about those requirements in the next few slides and the other options available to employers and individuals if sponsorship isn't possible. So moving on to the next slide, in relation to the impact on staff from 2021. So I've broken this down into existing staff in the UK and then potential new recruits. So those would be people who come from within the UK or be coming to the UK from overseas for the first time. So the first sort of branch of the diagram relates to existing UK staff. And if you're an employer or a UK sponsor at the moment, you hold a sponsor license in the UK, it could be that you have sponsored migrants under one of the main work routes, which is the Tier 2 route. There are two prongs to that, the Tier 2 intra-company transfer route and the Tier 2 general route. Those staff that are on existing Tier 2 visas are obviously going to be unaffected. Any sort of extensions will fall under the new immigration rules, which were announced a few weeks ago. So, for example, if you've got a Tier 2 general migrant that you employ at the moment, you could extend their visa as a skilled worker. And the new rules are coming into effect as of the 1st of December. So not long to wait now, and any sort of applications that are done after that will obviously fall under the new requirements, the new rules. The second branch of that diagram covers EEA or Swiss nationals and their family members who are here under free movement. And they have a right to stay here if they're in the UK by 11 p.m. on the 31st of December 2020, but they will need to apply under the EU settlement scheme to remain, even if they hold permanent residence. And that's a really important point that I want to mention today. I think it's a misconception that if someone is in possession of permanent residence, they don't need to apply for a status under the EU settlement scheme, but that is not the case. Remember, that also includes non-EEA family members of EEA or Swiss nationals who also have the rights of free movement, and all of those individuals have until the end of June 2021 to apply. At the moment, employers don't have the right to check whether someone has applied for a status via the EU settlement scheme. They can send out communications suggesting that that's done, how it can be done, how they can help, but they can't force someone to show that status. And the government has said there'll be no change in right to work checks until the end of June next year. So that's something to watch this space in relation to. I have a feeling that might change, but we don't have any further guidance on it at the moment. So moving on to new recruits, which is obviously going to be the area most impacted by the changes from 2021. So those new recruits in the UK who are non-EEA or nationals, if you're recruiting a new Tier 2 migrant, so someone that's already in the UK working for someone else, another employer with a Tier 2 visa, they'll remain under the points-based system, so they'll have to apply for a change of employment application, and that will then award them with a skilled worker visa. Skill and salary requirements will obviously apply, so they'll need to meet the various thresholds that I'm going to talk about in the next slide, and they'll obviously be sponsored under the new rules. The second sort of tranche is EEA or Swiss national new recruits and their family members already in the UK. If they're already in the UK, their status and rights will depend upon when they first came here. So they'll either fall under the EU settlement scheme, as they will have already registered, or will remain eligible to do so until the end of June next year, or they'll need to be sponsored under the points-based system. So employers will need to understand the immigration status of these individuals, and they'll need to do that by undertaking right to work checks. That obviously needs to be done in advance of someone starting work anyway, and that will ascertain which group the individuals fall into and the process they need to follow. And what we'll end up with essentially is two tiers of EEA or Swiss nationals and non-EEA family members from the 1st of Jan. So those who can remain even if they haven't applied under the EU settlement scheme yet, and then those who can only enter and remain with sponsorship under the points-based system as they weren't residing in the UK before 31st of December. And then lastly, the last sort of tranche in the slide shows those out-of-country non-GB or Irish nationals who are applying from overseas and coming to the UK from the 1st of January onwards, and unless otherwise eligible in another category, all non-GB Irish nationals will be treated alike and will require sponsorship under the points-based system. So as you can see, it's really important that all EEA or Swiss nationals and their family members resident in the UK before the 31st of December 2020 apply under the EU settlement scheme. That's one of the should be the main takeaways from today before the deadline in order to secure a status. They'll then obtain a pre-settled status if they can evidence residence for less than 5 years, or a settled status if they've been here or can prove residence for more than 5 years. Applying is relatively quick and easy. It involves downloading an app and answering a series of questions, and it is significantly easier if you've got a national insurance number and can input that into the questions the app asks you. So moving on to the next slide. Sorry, I'm rushing through the content here, but there are lots of changes that I want to make sure that I'm covering. I just want to touch upon any updates to the points-based system and some new sort of categories that might be useful going forward. So the first sort of change is to those that currently have a sponsor license or are looking to apply for a sponsor license going forward, one of the main categories to sponsor non-EA nationals present is the Tier 2 general visa category. That's being kept, but it's being renamed as the skilled worker visa under the new immigration system and is being slightly tinkered with. So there are some welcome relaxations, which include the resident labour market test being abolished, which was previously the 28-day advertising period that employers had to go through before they could assign a certificate of sponsorship for a potential Tier 2 general migrant. And also the annual cap on the number of individuals that can come onto that route is also being done away with. So there's no longer a cap of 20,700 individuals per annum. There are some switching relaxations as well, which is great. So going forward, switching from one visa category to another is going to be a lot easier. For example, you'll be able to switch from the skilled worker visa to the Tier 2 intra-company transfer visa from within the UK, if that's what you'd like to do, or more likely vice versa, because the skilled worker visa provides a route to settlement. And there are some exemptions to switching, so you can't, for example, switch from within the UK as a visitor into the skilled worker route, or from a seasonal worker visa into the skilled worker route, but most other switching is permitted. As I said, there's no RLMT, but employers will need to still show that they've done a recruitment process and then keep evidence of that on file. So there will be some admin associated with it. In terms of skill threshold, the good news is that the current skill threshold for a skilled worker visa is RQF level 6, which is broadly degree level. That is going to be lowered in the new immigration system to RQF level 3, which is broadly A-level skilled jobs. And I'm going to, in the next slide, show you some examples of some roles that are now going to be considered eligible for sponsorship under the immigration system. So it's opened up some more roles eligible for sponsorship, which is good news. Obviously, the skill level needs to be balanced against salary. So the current salary threshold for a Tier 2 general visa is 30k. That's being lowered to £25,600 per annum, or the going rate for the role if higher. But salaries as low as £20,480 per annum may qualify for sponsorship, but applicants will need to show that they score points in another way. So essentially, for lower salaried roles below around 25k, they'll only qualify if the role is on the shortage occupation list, or the applicant holds a PhD relevant to the role. An exemption to that is new entrants. So if an individual is applying under the skilled worker route and they're under the age of 26 at the date of application, or if they've last had leave as a student in the last couple of years in the UK, they'll be considered a new entrant. And as the government recognises that these individuals are at the start of their career, there's a lower salary threshold applicable to them. So the new entrant rate under the new immigration system is going to be slightly lowered from £20,800 per annum to £20,480 per annum, which is obviously useful for graduate recruitment. And the new entrant rate overall is going to be 30% lower than the rate for experienced workers in any occupation. However, the minimum of £20,480 per annum is always going to need to be met. Other good news in relation to that is that under the new rules, you can pay a new entrant that lower rate for up to 4 years, and currently you can only do so for 3. The Tier 2 ICT route now is being retained under the new immigration system. Not much change to it, still requires degree level skill, and the minimum salary is still £41,500 per annum. Excuse me. Switching provisions apply. So if you've got someone in the UK as a Tier 2 ICT migrant and they want to switch, that will now be available. They can switch into, for example, the skilled worker visa category going forward. And there are some relaxations to the cooling off provisions that make it easier to move people around. And then moving on to the next sort of the next category, the government are introducing a new graduate visa. So that will be similar to the Tier 1 post-study work category, which was abolished in 2012. And it will allow international students who have graduated from a UK university to stay for 2 years or 3 years if they're a PhD graduate. They can work at any skill level without needing to be sponsored in the UK. And that's expected to be launched next summer. So that's a good one, as it's not sponsored. There's no salary threshold, no skill threshold, which is great. And then lastly, I wanted to flag the frontier worker route. So You're a frontier worker if you're already, if you're an EU or EEA or Swiss citizen and you're employed or self-employed in the UK but you live elsewhere. And you'll be able to keep your frontier worker status if you're frontier working in the UK by the end of this year, but you'll need to apply for a frontier worker permit. So that's being launched, the frontier worker permit, on the 10th of December. And we need further guidance on it. The government hasn't released that yet, but applications will be free. You'll be able to apply online from inside or outside the UK. And from the 1st of July 2021, you'll need to hold a valid frontier worker permit as well as your passport or ID card to enter the UK as a frontier worker. It's basically just a useful option for EU or EEA or Swiss citizens who can't obtain a status under the EU settlement scheme due to issues establishing residence. So those are a few options and updates. So moving on to the next slide, I just mentioned earlier on in the presentation that the skilled worker category is opening up to NQF level 3 skilled roles, and I just wanted to show you some examples of some sort of roles that are now eligible for sponsorship. And then lastly, the last slide relates to useful links. So if you'd like to apply for a sponsor license as an employer, this is a link to further government information. And here's a link to the EU settlement scheme as well. So that kind of covers the material that I wanted to mention today. There's one question that's come in that I wanted to answer in relation to a German tour operator wanting to come to the UK, German tour guides coming to the UK to run tours with German tourists in Great Britain. Up until now, that's been fine. Is it possible going forward? The answer is yes. You can still come under Appendix V of the immigration rules as a visitor. A tour group courier contracted to a company with its HQ outside the UK can come as a visitor who's entering and departing the UK with a tour group organised by their company. So yeah, that's absolutely possible. And I think that covers everything that I wanted to talk about today. But if anyone's got any further questions, my contact details on the slide, the next slide, and I'm free to answer those.
Louisa, thank you so much for that. You've almost made a whole new series of restrictions sound like good news, which is a major achievement. I think just one question. You said that tour guides could come in with groups under a subsection V of the Immigration Act.
Yeah.
Do you know if this is reciprocated? I think this is the big question. A lot of the operators out there will be asking is what is the status of UK guides going over to the continent?
To be honest, I'm not sure. I imagine there will be some reciprocation, but it really, from what I've seen so far, policies really differs from country to country. So I think it's probably a case of just keeping an eye on any developments and seeing whether that is going to be possible. But I'm not sure there's a blanket sort of approval or system in place, as far as I'm aware. Simon, do you have any further insight?
Yeah, so just to add to that, so currently this is part of the negotiations which are going on with the EU. Hopefully we'll have an answer in the next week on the negotiations. If there is a no deal, that's not saying there won't be any agreement, because there's obviously option of bilateral agreements as well. Just to highlight on the working between UK and Ireland and vice versa is okay. Because of the common travel area. So we're talking about Schengen mainly. We do have some information on the website, so please look at our Brexit page. We also mentioned about family members who are also EU nationals as well, so please look at that link. And we will provide further updates as we go through the next following months, but we recognise it's a very big challenge for multi-country tours.
Yeah, indeed. I think this is probably the one big nightmare a lot of people are facing, is the prospect that their guide lecturing body are going to find it very, very difficult to work in Europe in the future. I'm sure that won't be the case, but we can't be certain about that until we see what's written on this agreement, which is supposed to be finalised within the next couple of weeks. There are huge tax implications to Brexit, and I'm delighted that we've got David Bennett here, an old friend of ETOA's, well, a friend of ETOA's over a long time. I'm not accusing him of being old. David, why don't you take it away? We've got a presentation here, which I'll click through for you.
Okay, thank you, Tom. I think you were right first time. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to make a few, well, I'm going to cover a few issues this afternoon. They'll all be very, very quick, but of course I'm happy to elaborate on any of them in the Q&A afterwards. I'm going to start with a couple of general comments, just to get the later comments into some sort of context. It's well known, of course, that the EU VAT system applies throughout the EU compulsorily. It's inevitable then that leaving the EU means change. Many aspects of EU VAT support the operation of the single market, and again, therefore, leaving the single market means that we lose some of the VAT measures designed to facilitate cross-border trade within the single market. And TOMS, the Tour Operators Margin Scheme, is one such arrangement. Now, these changes mean huge upheaval for those trading in goods. Of course, that's not the subject for this afternoon, but there are changes for services too, and travel is one of the most affected service areas. Okay, so as I said, TOMS is one of the single measure markets that we're about, measures rather, that we're about to lose in the UK, and that's because TOMS is an EU scheme. It applies to tour operators in the EU. It's a protection, it's a simplification. It allows tour operators and similar trading in the EU, selling travel in more than one member state, to account for VAT in just one member state. That's the inherent simplification, the objective of the scheme. So the loss of the EU version of TOMS next year means two things really for the UK. Firstly, what UK rules will replace those arrangements, and secondly, what does the change mean for UK businesses selling travel enjoyed within the EU? Well, let's look at the UK first. I have to say there is still no certainty on this. I think we're almost there. What I'm about to describe is probably 95% certain, at least, to be implemented. And I think within a week or so, we will probably get the all clear from HMRC on what I'm about to say. We do already have legislation. This was introduced last year in preparation for a possible no-deal Brexit. I just refer to it as the new TOMS order. It effectively introduces a new UK version of the existing EU TOMS scheme. Now, I will stress it's a UK scheme, not an EU scheme, which is important when we come on to look at some of the other implications. But this order would make two changes to existing rules. Firstly, and perhaps obviously, it would limit the operation of TOMS to tour operators located in the UK. More importantly, it would retain margin taxation, but the margin would only be subject to VAT to the extent that the margin is earned on UK travel. So for many UK-based tour operators, the amount of TOMS VAT payable will reduce enormously, quite possibly to nil. All non-UK travel within TOMS is zero rated. I know many ETOA members trade in such a way that TOMS is not an issue for them, or perhaps applies to just a small part. For many ETOA members, it's the rest of the stuff perhaps which is most important. And here HMRC have said, well, look, we're changing the bare minimum. We have to change TOMS. We're changing it only to the extent that we have to. And the rules for travel falling outside of TOMS, and that would be most wholesalers, will not change. Again, I stress this is not 100% sure, but this is what they've told me several times now on the phone. So for wholesalers, we think that the default position would be to fall outside of TOMS, and the existing treatment of standalone services and packages will remain as it is right now. But it will still be possible for wholesalers to opt into TOMS, but of course they would now be opting into a specific UK scheme and not the EU scheme. Happy, of course, to elaborate on any detail of this a bit later on. Tom, if we could move on. The next issue is to look But what all of this is likely to mean, or may mean, for UK tour operators selling EU travel. And here the distinction between the new UK scheme and the EU scheme becomes all important. The protection or the simplification of the EU scheme will not apply to us. As a basic principle, holidays and other forms of travel are subject to VAT in the member state in which they take place. Doesn't matter whether it's B2C or B2B in that context. So there's a technical issue, certainly. Will tour operators be making supplies and have an obligation to pay VAT in each of the member states to which they send travellers? That's a difficult question. It's a fundamental one, but difficult and unclear nevertheless, because the law is ambiguous and there's no case law on this. We do know, however, that the European Commission is very aware of the issue, has been considering it, but they haven't published anything yet. And individual member states are aware of it as well. And they look at this as a level playing field issue and are concerned that their own tour operators will be put at a competitive disadvantage if UK tour operators can compete without paying any VAT. Of course, it's already an issue. Swiss, Norwegian, American, Australian, etc. tour operators are very, very rarely registered in any member state. So we don't know, in short, whether the member states will look at this differently for the UK. They may do, not to single out the UK, but simply that the UK's future status makes this so much bigger an issue than it is at the moment. Okay, and again, Tom, if we can click on to the next slide. We should also consider what the position for EU tour operators that sell UK travel is concerned. Well, our VAT system for the time being, even though there are certain enforced changes, will still mirror the EU system to a very large extent. So it follows that whilst UK tour operators selling EU destinations may have an obligation to pay VAT in the EU, so EU tour operators selling the UK as a destination may have to register here. Here, I think there is a bit more clarity. It's long been HMRC's policy that third country non-EU suppliers do not have to register in the UK, and it's expected that that will continue. So again, not 100% there yet, but it is very likely, I think, that there will be no requirement on non-UK tour operators to register here when selling the UK. But just a reminder that in certain circumstances, particularly in the wholesale sector, it is possible to register in the UK as a non-UK established tour operator, and it is beneficial in many circumstances to do so. And those rules should be unaffected by all of this. Okay, and again, Tom, on to the next one. A bit of context again. This has been going on for a very, very long time. Some of you, well, Tom and I certainly remember the Commission's proposals in this area all the way back in 2002. They were never accepted, but it shows how long the Commission has been on the case. But it's taken on more urgency in the last few years. And there's a project on the go at the moment on the part of the Commission, under which they're considering whether the current rules are fit for purpose and how, if necessary, they might be reformed. I was involved in a big study with the Commission back in 2017. If anybody's interested, that's still available on the Commission website, and it highlights a lot of problems with the current rules. Now, that study led on to a consultation which finished some 2 months ago. And that's where we are with this at the moment. We're waiting for a response from the Commission. There's absolutely nothing on their website yet, but we do expect something next year in the form, possibly, well, a decision first, whether to proceed with reform or not. If they do, we would be looking out for legislative proposals and an impact assessment. Now, nothing here will change quickly. I can't see much likelihood at all that we will have any change in the EU rules before 2024. For those of you outside the UK, of course, this is all very important, less so in the UK, but it is important that the level playing field, I mean, those of you following the Brexit negotiations will have heard this expression thousands of times, but it's exactly the same expression used in the VAT discussions. In this context, of course, it means the same treatment of EU and third country businesses. And it is a key objective. It formed a large part of this year's public consultation, and it's written into all of the Commission documents on this. So on the assumption that we do have reform, it is highly likely that the rules will be changed in such a way to ensure that tour operators, wherever they are in the world, will be treated for VAT purposes in the same way. It's quite a goal, quite difficult, but that's certainly the objective. And on to my last slide, just a couple of final points which affect some of you at least. So the retail export scheme HMRC have announced will cease at the end of this year. Now this is the scheme under which visitors to the UK, non-EU visitors I should say, who purchase goods whilst they're here, for personal export, i.e. they're taking them home with themselves, are entitled to a VAT refund. It doesn't apply to EU visitors. There had been hopes, expectations that in fact the scheme would be extended from next year to cover both EU and non-EU visitors, but instead the government has announced that the scheme is to be abolished completely, which will make tourists' purchases of clothes, etc., which they take home with them, that bit more expensive. Northern Ireland, we're talking here, of course, the Northern Ireland Protocol, and you will all have read and heard about the status of transactions between between GB and Northern Ireland. For tour operators, my understanding is that the UK rules will apply, not the EU rules. So everything that we've talked about on the previous slide about the position for UK tour operators applies, I understand, equally to the tour operators in Northern Ireland. There was one question, I think, submitted in advance, which I believe dealt with the level playing field. Now, I've covered this point already. There is uncertainty, but in the short term at least, there is a distinct likelihood that UK tour operators selling EU destinations will enjoy a competitive advantage. Not in all circumstances, but in many. That's the basis of a concern on the part of certain member states. But by the same token, EU tour operators selling the UK are likely to enjoy the same competitive advantage over UK tour operators. Again, not in all circumstances, but in many. Of course, if anybody would like to ask me to elaborate on those points, I'm happy to do so. But that's the end of my prepared stuff, Tom.
David, thank you very much. I think you've, as ever, made a fiendishly complicated subject quite lucid. I'm right in thinking that there is one or two real dangers here. We've got the prospect of the UK-based tour operators who sell Europe or deal in Europe. They may be obliged to register in every European country. Am I right in saying that?
Well, that's the concern, yes. So at the moment, Tom's is designed to apply across the board. We know, of course, that wholesalers in the UK typically fall outside, but they're still protected under that EU scheme. We lose the EU scheme, the protection obviously disappears. So as a basic point, a UK tour operator, B2C or B2B, selling a holiday in Spain is providing services that are subject to Spanish VAT. And it all comes down to how the Spanish authorities will view that from a technical point of view. And secondly, how they weigh up, I suppose, the importance of attempting to collect revenue on the one hand, with on the other a desire not to disincentivize tour operators selling tourists to Spain.
It's a naughty one because the UK is uniquely large, so it's a very tempting prize for a tax collecting authority to say, actually, there's a big pool of money which we're entitled to. But the UK is also another third country origin market. And if the UK is forced to go along those lines, it's possible, I'm not saying it will happen, but it's possible that other third countries such as the United States, Japan and China will fall into that area as well. So there's a new threat which we hadn't really thought
of. Yes, it's a developing area. I mean, even before the Brexit referendum, this is a subject that was gaining some traction with some of the member states. They started looking at it in earnest back in about 2014, I think. But nobody really has done anything. I understand Germany has a case going through its courts shortly that will look not at UK companies, but at third countries' status for this purpose. So that could be influential. So it is something that has been gaining in importance. And we see it in other countries as well. We had an issue with Iceland a number of years ago, but more recently Australia has started to look for non-Australian holiday companies to pay their equivalent of VAT. And the OECD guidelines make it clear that tourism should be taxed where it's consumed. So it's a well understood principle from a purely technical perspective. The big issue, of course, is enforcement.
It's a huge issue. We've, speaking from a UK perspective, we've got a long history of trying to collect indirect taxation in North America, and it usually ends up with tea in the harbour, if I remember rightly. We're not good at that. I think, David, thank you very much indeed. What you're saying is that at the moment, it looks quite good news, but the potential downside is real, and as you said, it's a developing situation. It's a new Chinese curse. May you live in a developing situation.
Indeed.
Now, I'm delighted that we're being joined by Martin Randall, the creative director of his eponymous Martin Randall Travel. Martin, you've got a number of concerns, I know, concerning Brexit. I imagine one of them is going to be the status of your guides and lecturers. You're on mute. Hold it. Oh man, I got demute. You should be live now.
You are correct. It's an existential issue for a number of specialist cultural tour operators, but us more than many. It is the speaker, the lecturer, the so-called guide, which is the key ingredient. People travel for that person, and if there are inhibitions, if we are required to engage a local guide, or if our speaker is not allowed to speak on site, then our clients will no longer want what we are offering. Now, this was a long and hard-fought battle within the EU. You, Tom, were in the vanguard of that. And on the whole, it was successful. Our speakers and the speakers in other specialist companies were allowed legally to speak on sites. Of course, there are exceptions for private places, but that applies worldwide, without the interference of local guides. It's important because we are offering something which one can rarely get from a local guide. There are some extremely good local guides around the world. I've heard hundreds in my time, but there are very, very few who provide the same sort of information and analysis and understanding of the country that our clients are looking for and do get, usually, from our guides. The problem is that a standard local qualified guide is a standard local qualified guide. There's not a great deal of variation, and they tend to aim for a fairly low level in order to be comprehended and enjoyed by a wide range of people. Nothing wrong with that. But just as you can buy a Financial Times or a Sun, you choose, or a Das Bild or Die Frankfurter Zeitung, so the same should apply with those who provide commentary on tours. So it is a very big worry. The solutions are accept the inevitable and pay for a local guide to accompany the tour in addition to our speaker. To my mind, that's extortion. So is paying for a silent guide, and that doesn't always work. That is someone who is qualified but stays with the group but doesn't actually speak. Or we make a major change to what we do, and our guide speaks only, say, in a hotel meeting room, and that would vitiate the quality of what we do. And just to emphasize this, I mean, the people we engage are often leading experts, sometimes world experts, people who know more than practically anyone else, people with an ability to put it across, because that is a major criterion for us. It's not just knowledge. And people who have a head start in understanding or having some feel for the background and knowledge and interest of the people to whom they are speaking.
Martin, you very eloquently described the problem you're confronting, but the problem you're confronting really is manifold. It's not simply a freedom to work, but it's also a freedom to do a task which is a controlled activity in some destinations. And up until now, under the EU, I believe, and I don't know whether you have an angle on this, Lisa, but I believe there was a degree of recognition and reciprocity in professional qualifications. But the professional qualifications your guys have, or your people have, lies almost way above the normal guiding professional qualification. So the two barely meet. Is there going to be any scope for mutual recognition of professional qualifications?
To be honest, I'm not sure that there's been any further sort of developments in relation to that I have seen going forward. Simon, do you know of anything additional?
Yeah, just to say that this has been discussed as part of the trade negotiations, but of course, because the UK is leaving the single market, this is a key EU kind of regulation. So it's kind of covered in the kind of the Posted Workers Directive as well. So we have to wait and see. It is quite early to say, but yeah, we'll be able to comment further certainly in the coming months on this point.
I mean, the status is, Luis at the beginning of this webinar gave a brilliant summary of the. He gave us a good guided tour of the state of our ignorance as to what's going to happen. There's a long list in terms of healthcare, ID cards, borders, pets, telephones, package travel directive. There's a huge list of things which we simply don't know are going to be what is happening to them on January the 1st. And I fear guiding is going to be another one until the dust clears. I'm not sure. I would love to be able to give some more clarity to this, Martin. And there's a real issue for all the companies out there who have guides who hold UK passports, who conduct, for instance, American groups throughout Europe. Their status is up in the air at the moment. And we think that we can declare them business visitors, but their functionality is going to be strictly limited to 90 days. And for someone trying to work a season, it's not going to be practical. Christina, you've been sitting there very patiently from Special Tours in Spain. I know you've got a question of the issues that you need to raise in terms of general cabotage throughout Europe. Could you just explain what the sort of questions and issues that you're confronting?
Well, yeah, well, thanks for inviting me to this meeting and good afternoon from Madrid. And I will very quick. I just would like to point out a couple of things. Since Brexit issue came up, we have faced some challenges with operating tours. And it is true that we feel that Brexit itself has not affected to sales comparing to 2019, at least those coming from America. Spanish market traditionally book their trips later, and we didn't have enough info before COVID came to our lives. But we have changed our operative. We operate tours with Spanish coaches all around Europe. Most of our fleet is Spanish, and we require some specific requirements on coaches. And we also provide our own Wi-Fi on board, Wi-Fi. From 2020, we couldn't operate tours starting or ending within the UK due to Brexit. We were prepared to operate all these tours with local coaches, which means a high increase of cost in some cases, and also the problem of availability. As for example, in Scotland, there's a very high demand during summer, and coach companies didn't have enough fleet to cover all the tour operator demands. Also, our company works with coach from 54 seats, and this is something difficult to find in the UK, as most coaches are up to 49 or 53 seats, sorry. And this is an additional problem for us. And also another challenge we have to face is the fact that we operate tours starting and ending outside the UK, but going through it. For example, we have tours starting in Paris, ending in Rome, for example, but going to London in the meanwhile. And every passenger chooses whether to start or end their trip. We can have 15 packs in Paris, 35 in London, and again 20 going to Brussels. And we don't really know how is the effect to our work with Brexit and cabotage rules, as we think this is not allowed to do. We have many questions about this, the cabotage.
Simon, you are our resident wheeled expert. Have you got any angle on this?
Yeah, I mean, just to add, the UK will join the Interbus agreement. This will allow closed door tours and international tours. So the issue we see is it's called cabotage, is where the passenger or the tour will start in one country. So, for example, the UK, and also leave the UK as well. So, for instance, if there was an EU coach and it went into the UK, picked up passengers and left the UK, that would be allowed under Interbus. But the actual operation of cabotage itself, this is kind of an EU practice, and it is being discussed as in the negotiations. Now, the UK government have highlighted they are open to cabotage by EU operators, but they would like reciprocal measures by the EU. So we'll find out a bit more details on this, because it kind of affects freight. So and it's a key issue which is still to be resolved in the negotiations. But just to highlight for coach travel, if you're conducting closed door journeys, there won't be too much kind of changes. There's a slight difference in documentation. You'll need the Interbus waybill. We do have a link on our website which explains a bit more, certainly for UK operators, what they need to do in the EU. For instance, they'll need a DB sticker, even though the number plate might say EU on it. And also you'll need a certified copy of the operator's license. So please, as members, ask us. We're happy to expand a bit more on this, but international driving permits are generally not really going to be an issue for up to 12 months tours. But as Christina said, the cabotage itself, and I know this has been raised earlier with one of our questions by Irish coaches, just to highlight, we'll wait to see with the Irish border, so like on the border counties specifically, because some of these coach companies will do tours across Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland. So we'll give further clarity on this, but it's a good chance that could be allowed on the border counties of Ireland, and then we'll see elsewhere in the UK in the coming months. So but also as well, just to add about Switzerland and Andorra, there still isn't an agreement yet for UK coaches to go to these countries through the EU. and we'll provide further update on this soon.
Well, thank you for that. Well, there's an opportunity, Niall, if you're still there, that maybe you should be encouraging everyone to start their coach tours in Ireland before they go on through the UK. You could bypass all the cabotage problems that way.
I have to say, just
Dublin awaits you.
I thought I had problems until I started to hear all these issues, but a range of complications that have been thrown up. And you know, Tom, we had a Brexit working group on Tourism Ireland. You've been on it for the last 3.5 years, but I think the size and scale and complication of issues with only 6 weeks left is nothing short of breathtaking.
It is. I find it incredible, but this is neither here nor there. Just to reiterate, some people are raising some points through the questions. This webinar is going to be available on the ETOA website, and it's going to be viewable within the next 24 hours. And that means you will be able to see the slide decks that our two presenters had to rush through. We've got a number of questions still here. Simon, do you want to give us a few questions from the people posing them?
Yeah, so we've had a lot of questions about borders, of course. This is pre the webinar and obviously in the webinar itself. The Irish border has been raised. As Niall said earlier, there is a common travel area, but there's other agreements to be aware of as well, called the Northern Ireland Protocol, as David highlighted. That is to avoid a hard border in Ireland. And also there's a Good Friday Agreement, which was set up in the 1990s. So really just to iterate, we don't foresee any hard border in Ireland. I'm sure Niall has conversations with government on this. So I know some US operators have been asking how they'll be affected. Well, not really. It'll be the same as before. So just travel within Ireland. Regarding the UK, about obviously border delays, it's kind of going to be a phased approach, and the idea is the UK government will be doing a lot of customs checks away from the border. So the idea is when the freight vehicle does get to the border, there won't be any delays. So for instance, we've had a Dutch company contact us about, is it viable to run a day trip? Hopefully, yes. There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, so delays are restricted. Where we see potential maybe delays is certainly UK going into Schengen, because there would be up to maybe additional checks, for instance, proving your right of entry. So are you there for visiting, proof of accommodation, etc. So, but we do know airports, say in Spain and Portugal, they are looking to have non-EU UK only lanes. So the idea is other non-EU nationals wouldn't be joining the same queue as the UK. But of course, once COVID kind of recovery happens, we'll find out a bit more on this kind of area. But just to highlight, there is a visa waiver there. So as a visitor, unless you have probably a pet, there isn't too much if you're an occasional visitor. But as Tom highlighted earlier, the 90 days in 180 is a rolling day period, and we please check your calendar a lot on this. We're happy to help, of course, and also look at our website. So we have a lot of information on there about customs, about duty free, for instance, and what you can bring back. And also the other question that's been raised a lot is, can I sell into the EU? So because as a UK operator, now that this is possible, there will be different changes. For instance, if the customer is buying in the EU, we're happy to follow up on this as well. So please give us an email, and we're happy to have a call on this. So I don't think there's any other kind of major questions that have been raised. It's mainly obviously tour guides. On the Erasmus scheme, that is part of the negotiations as well. So that is included in the current trade negotiations in UK's participation in the scheme.
Well, can I clarify the common travel area just for listeners, so to speak?
Oh, please, yes.
Yeah, so just to reassure you, the common travel area, which has existed since the 1920s between the UK and Ireland, was once again underpinned by a memorandum of understanding between the UK and Irish governments, which was further underpinned by legislation last year. So regardless of what happens on the 1st of January in terms of a UK-EU trade deal, the common travel area will remain in place. So for a pragmatic example, if you have a coach tour that comes into Belfast, it can exit through Dublin, or if it comes into Dublin, it can exit through Belfast. So there'll be no checks or stops at the border at all.
Thank you. Now, just to reiterate, the only, well, not the only danger, but the big danger for tourism from a no deal, and the immediate danger, as Simon iterated, is the operational difficulty of moving from the UK into Europe. Vice versa isn't really it won't really be too much of a problem, because the UK has made it clear that they're not really going to change the procedure at all. There is an irony in taking back control and then imposing no new controls. The danger lies when the UK citizens who now become non-members of the European Union, non-members of the EEA, arrive in Schengen. The border officials, wherever they're arriving, are obliged to check, do a full survey of the person's passport, inquire the purpose of the visit, their means, the length of the visit, and their means of keeping themselves sustained on their visit, and where they're expecting to stay. These questions are expected to take up to 3 to 4 times the normal glance and pass and scan process of processing someone through a border. And it's estimated that it can take up to 2 minutes per person. 2 minutes per person is fine when you're the first 4 people in the line. If you're part of a 250-seat aeroplane, those 4 minutes suddenly look rather a long time. And the lines at the airport potentially could be very, very long indeed. And to a certain extent, whilst the Brits have slightly brought it on themselves, we were very concerned that other third country nationals, Americans, Japanese, what have you, might find themselves on this flight and find themselves in the non-EEA line, which may last up to 2 hours. I don't think it's going to be that bad. It's not in anyone's interest for this to happen, but the only information we have is that there's a standing binding obligation emphasized and re-emphasized by the European Commission that these are the border controls in force when people enter the European Union or the EEA. And it's very, very difficult for these to be waived, though I'm sure, as we've been alluded to, places like Portugal and Spain will create individual areas for the individual lines for the Brits, either to be sort of quarantined in or to be processed at speed. We're reaching the end of our limit here. I wonder, Christina, have you got anything you would like to add at all? No. Martin, beyond guiding, is there any real obstacle you can see other than all the obvious ones that we don't know about? Is there anything in particular you need to raise?
All my concerns were well covered. So thank you very much. I'm not mad or
well, it's just really up to me to thank Louisa, to thank David, Christina, Martin, and Niall, who's joined us for the whole thing, which has been a great honour. We value our relationship with Tourism Ireland, and Simon, who's joined me. And thanks to all the other panelists who've taken part. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I've got a feeling that we'll be discussing this a lot in the coming months. So wait for the next instalment. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.